Capital by Karl Marx, chapters 1 through 4. The beast speaks.
Where do you think the poet in you comes from?
I think that all of us have art in our souls as part of human culture. We're not, it's not innate in some metaphysical sphere. We're not born with it, but a part of the process of being human and being embedded in human culture is that it unleashes all of these artistic feelings and artistic ways of looking at the world and communicating. And the problem is that as we grow up, it gets kicked out of us in the schools and everywhere else. I had an inspirational art teacher when I was about 12. He wasn't really teaching me, actually. He was teaching at the community college, but I met him. And his theory was just that his job as an art teacher was simply to stop kicking and let people do their thing. And that had a profound influence on me. I met him because he was fired from his job, even though his art students were winning prizes all over the West Coast, because he didn't teach them. He just said, all right, here's the class, there's the clay, there's the wood, there's the tools, there's the canvas, there's the pigment. Get to work. I'll see you at the end of the term. If you have any questions, there's the door to my office. It's always open. I'd love to talk to you about painting, sculpture, philosophy, football, religion, anything you want to talk about. Here I am. And suddenly this junior college, which was famous for football, basketball, baseball, and golf teams and teaching welding and agriculture, suddenly it just exploded with energy and enthusiasm because these kids were unleashed and they were interested in everything, the world, and they were putting it all into the work they were doing. And the football teams were having trouble with the players. Some of them were wanted to spend more time in art than their national ranked football team. But then at the end of the term, he would have them come in with the stuff they'd done or with their best stuff and talk about what they felt they'd learned. And then he'd ask them what grade they thought they should have, and they would tell him, and he'd write that down, and that was their grade. Once or twice in the course of the 3 years he was there before they fired him, someone came in and took the piss, and having not seen him all quarter said, yeah, give me an A, and he wouldn't do that. But that was like once, I think, maybe twice. Other than that, the only arguments he ever had with students was saying, don't you think you're being too hard on yourself? I mean, look at all the work you've done here. I mean, I know you're a perfectionist, and that's why it's so good what you're doing, but in the grades, you got to be fair to yourself too. So anyway, he was a seriously, his name was Francis Coelho, and if you Google his name, you'll find artists who credit him with unleashing their creativity when they were students. He had a national reputation as a painter himself, and his wife was, I believe, second viola player for the Chicago Philharmonic before they moved to the boondocks where I lived so they could raise their kids in the country. But so that's a long-winded answer to a question that is that basically we've all got it. I'm not special that way, except that maybe I'm lucky enough that I didn't get it kicked out of me quite so much as some other people.
So there's a poet within all of us.
Sorry?
You think there's a poet within everyone?
Everyone, yeah, or an artist, and it comes out in different ways.
Yeah.
I suppose the other big thing effect on my poetry is I had a very good, kind of inspirational, but also very lazy English teacher in 9th and 10th grade. And so he came up with this way of teaching us writing without having to do a lot of reading himself. He would give us assignments where the word count had to be exact, or almost exact. So for the first few months of the year, we had assignments that were like 15 words, plus or minus one word. And by the end of the year, it had built up to 125 words, plus or minus 3 words. So one, he didn't have to do a lot of reading then, but two, it made us careful, it made us look at every single word and syllable in everything we wrote. So it taught me It taught me a lot about the sound and the compression of sound and the compression of meaning into a very small space.
I would be your greatest lover. I would build you cities, feed your children, fill up your lives with music and dancing. I would cover the earth with wheat fields and rice paddies, drill down into its core to pull out strings of steel and oil. I would scrape the sky with desert sand melted into glass, cool the hot, heat the cold, charm the fish out of the ocean, and teach the trees to stand in a row and rain down manna.
What sort of an influence do you think poets can have on today's modern culture?
I think they can have a huge influence. There's a famous quote from W.H. Auden in one of his poems where he says, "Poetry makes nothing happen." And I don't agree with that. And there's another quote that you hear a lot as it's used as a derogatory phrase. People talk about preaching to the converted or preaching to the choir as if that's a bad thing. And I think, well, why is that a bad thing? Doesn't the choir, doesn't the congregation don't they need to hear words of inspiration, and don't they need to have words that in this world that's beating them down in so many different ways, have words that help them to find their own inner strength and the strength of their brothers and sisters and come together? So I think it's not, poetry isn't going to make a revolution, but poetry is part of the cultural mix that keeps the spirit of freedom and the desire to fight against injustice burning in all our hearts. And I think you can't measure that. It doesn't have any tanks or missiles coming out of the pages, but ideas are a powerful thing. And they can be powerful for good or for bad. I think the most dangerous thing in the world is a heart full of love and a head full of ignorance. There's an old saying, an African proverb I've heard it described to being loved makes you strong, loving someone makes you brave. And if you have that strength and that bravery, but you don't understand how to use it, or who to use it for, or who your real friends and who your real enemies are, you can do so much damage to your own interests as well as the people of the world. And that poetry, art in general, isn't the answer to that, but it's part of the answer.
If I were alive, I would teach you the meaning of hell. I would blast you with war, rip your children from your arms, swallow them in famine, smother them into silence, dry up their tears with death. I would teach you to fear your neighbor, train you to march in step. You might even come to believe in me. Isn't this how a wounded God would love? With kindness and gifts, wonderful gifts, mixed in with pieces of heartless cruelty. And if my cruelty is on a global scale, so are my gifts. And the greatest gift of all, I would do this through you. How else could it be? You made me. Now I make you. I am the law of value, the profit and loss ledger of the earth. I was born in the gulf between what you can do and what you were worth.
So, from Shakespeare to modern day poetry, how do you feel poetry will and can evolve in years to come?
From Shakespeare to modern day poetry, and beyond. Okay, well, first of all, I would say that in thinking in terms of evolution, and kind of answering your question on a much bigger scale first, I would say we're right on the cusp of a change that is as big as the beginning of human life as the beginning of life on the planet, and certainly as big as the evolution of conscious intelligence on the planet. Because now we're at a point we can just see the beginning of this. We're not right in the middle of it. But where with genetic engineering and with microchip technology and all the future developments of that we're either going to evolve into a new type of human race. We are going to evolve into a new type of human race, and it's either going to be a more enlightened, more conscious, more brother and sisterly kind of human race, or we're going to end up being an anthill, or we're going to end up destroying ourselves. And so within that context, people talk about Dolly the sheep as if it's a big deal, and I'm thinking, well, no, like 100 years from now, if you want your kids to travel in space, you might have them designed as spaceships. Who knows what the changes are going to be? So now here we are just at the beginning of that period, and in Shakespeare, Shakespeare was really kind of the beginning of book culture, and also Shakespeare, the Elizabethan era. I mean, the books have been around for a while. Well, they've been around forever, almost, or for human history. But printed books, the movable type, that had only been invented a couple hundred years before, and it was really coming into its own.
You can do miracles, but what are you worth? How much do you eat? Do you live in a house or on the street? What does it take to make and replace you? That much no one can take away from you and still own you. But after that, everything is fair game. After that, it becomes worthwhile to own a slave. After that, the more you make, the more there is to steal, until you who produce the food become the meal. And the wonders you have made become a curse, become a plague, become a gang of howling wolves, but somehow they are riding in sleighs and it's you pulling at the traces. And the whip cracks. That's me. I am the whip. But the wolves imagine they are in control, and they snarl and slash at each other as they drive you forward. And you do grow forward. So what if you leave behind a trail of blood?
Performer, poet, writer, what next for you?
What next for me? Well, in the background is that I'm pushing 70, and I've been writing all my life with such little success in any kind of commercial, worldly way, and still plugging away at it so unsuccessfully that it's almost inspiring, I think, that I've stuck at it that long. And I have a string of arts degrees on up to PhD level that basically came about because it had gotten to the point where if my friends saw me walking down the street toward them with a manila envelope in my hand, they would duck into the alley because they knew I was going to try and make them read my latest play or novel or whatever. And I knew if I went to school, or university as you call it here, if I went back, they'd have to read it because they were getting paid to read it. So that was kind of my career up until then. I performed, I made a living as a musician, but I'm very good as a musician, but I'm just a journeyman. I'm a very good I'm an extremely good second or third rate musician, but I'm not. I imagine myself to be really a great poet, and I'm certainly not a great musician, but I could make a living doing that. I couldn't reach an audience in any meaningful sense until the spoken word scene has exploded. And the last big thing was I did a show, Science, Love and Revolution, at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival this last year. And I got rave reviews from papers and magazines who had never ever bothered to give me a bad review before. And it kind of opened up new vistas for me. And but what for me really, I'm going to do another show at the Fringe Festival this year. It's going to be very different. I'm quite nervous about it. It's much more personal and subjective and more transgressive and more about, it's more like Bukowski than like Lenin or someone. And I hope that does well. And I could see myself, I'm happy with the audience I'm reaching now. I'd like to reach more people, and I'll keep trying. But if I live the rest of my life just reaching the kind of the level I'm at now, but still I'm able to produce good stuff that people are listening to, I could die happy, when I finally get there, 100 years from now, I hope.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.